The game itself has been reviewed by just about every person who does reviews. So there's plenty on how to play the game. There's plenty of initial impressions on the game out there. I think there's people who have done the expansion as well. But the purpose of this is to look at the game as a whole, in the context of it being out for a couple of years and a lot of people have been playing it, and to look at the expansion itself and see how much it adds to the game, at least in my opinion. I'll give you just a very quick overview of some of it. Basically, you have these workers here, and you start out with 3 of them. And on your turn, you're either going to place them out on this board, starting at the 0. And the more workers you place, the more you have to pay in corn. Corn is sort of the currency of the game. So when you place a worker out, I placed 1 worker out. Maybe I want to place another worker out here on this 0. That's going to cost me 1 additional corn. And if I was to place a 3rd worker, it's going to cost me in all 2 additional corn. I can also place, you don't have to place on a 0. If the space is occupied where you're going to place, like for example here, these 2 spaces are occupied, I could go all the way over to here, but it's going to cost me an additional 2 corn plus the additional penalty here for the number of workers. So it would cost me 4 corn to get that out. Now, you're either going to be placing workers on your turn or removing workers. And when you remove workers, you get to do the action that your worker's on. You can also pay to do an action that you've already passed, but you can't do the actions that are ahead. So, for example, this space here allows me, if I pull my worker off, I can pull as many workers as I want, or I can just pull 1 out, but you have to do either place workers or take them off. You can't pass a turn and do nothing. So for here, it's trading resources for corn or corn for resources based on this exchange rate here. Some of the this area here, Palenque, generally what this ring does is it gives you food and wood as you go around. It's also the place where you can get these markers as well, which can be worth points depending on if there's any end of game scoring tiles that include those. Once they're gone, you can't get any more resources out of there, but this one here is always available for a resource. At the top wheel is mostly resources, and you can get crystal skulls, which are used over here on this board. Over here is technology and building, as well as there's a spot here where you can move up the temples and get points. The buildings are over here. These are buildings that you can buy. I have the Second Age buildings out. These aren't available at the beginning of the game, but these are out right now. And this level up here is monuments, and these are end of game scoring type tiles, and they're quite expensive to build. These tiles have special powers, like this one here feeds your workers, 3 workers. This one here is a straight up 8 points. This tile here moves you up this technology tree. This technology tree gives you sorry about that. Gives you special benefits. A lot of them have to do with getting additional resources when you take an action. The top row is for corn, getting additional corn. The bottom row has to do with crystal skulls here. So, generally speaking, those are a lot of the spaces there. And there's also the temple up there. And as some of these, you can move up the temple by getting certain tiles, certain buildings. You can also move up the temple with some of these spaces here The crystal skulls also give you chances to move up the temple based on the symbol here, the matching symbol on the temple. And the temples can give you points, and those are scored periodically and at the end of the game as well. After everyone's taken a turn, this wheel turns and the pegs move up a level. So the longer the pegs are on the wheel, generally the better the action is that they'll be able to take later in the game. So if you have a bunch of these tokens out, eventually they're going to be moving up to better and better actions that you can take. That's basically the general overview of the game, and there's plenty of other people, like I said, who have gone more in depth on the rules. I think Rahdo has done a complete run through of the game that shows you how to play. I would recommend going there if you want to know more about the base game. I think he's also probably done the expansion as well. This is a feature in the expansion that has come out, and it has to do with bonuses you can get periodically through the game. These are symbols that come up on the wheel, and the first one's here, the next one's here, and then here. It's going to come up 4 times. And when those come up, you have to, not only do you have to feed your workers with corn, but certain things happen. This one scores resources on the temple. This will score points on the temple. But also, if you're playing with the expansion, you have to deal with these scorings and penalties. So when this peg on the wheel comes up first, you have to take care of this scoring tile. In this case, it is, you're trying to get these tiles off of the palenque wheel, and if you collect 0 of them, you get -5 points. 1 to 2, you get 0. 3 to 5, you get 6, and 6 and more, you get 13 points. But also, whenever you collect wood during this time, you get 1 less wood resource. Resources are represented here. There is wood, stone, and gold. And after that comes up in scores, then you'll be working on this next tile. You can be working on all of these and getting yourself in a position so that when they come up, you have what it's needed. Generally, whatever it is that is the bonus, there's also something negative related to that. For example, this one is you get scored on how many buildings you have, but whenever you get a resource, you get 1 less resource, which makes it harder generally to build buildings. So the nice thing about this is you can kind of plan where you want to be towards the end of the game and prepare and have these things in order if you want to get the points. You can also ignore it if you have another way to get points faster, but this can add up. -5, -5, -5 is -15 points if you don't do anything on this at all. And on the other side of it is if you do get a lot of these items, if you had 7 buildings here, that's 13 points, which is a nice chunk of points in this game. So those are the major components of the game. The expansion, like I said, comes with these people here who have special abilities, and everybody gets a random person. You could also probably do this with a draft, depending on how you want to do it. But they have special abilities. The game I played with, I had this guy here, Urakan, and what he does is it lets me, if I'm up on this wheel, instead of taking action on this wheel, I can take the same number on Ushmal. And if I'm on Yakshatlan, I can take the action on Palenque or vice versa. So it doesn't really matter where my people are. I can take an action on another temple if I decide I want it. This person over here, when they're placing out their workers, they go by this chart, which is slightly better than the chart here. As you can see that when you place out that second worker, it only costs you an extra corn, but in this case it doesn't, and the rest of the chart's a little bit better as well. So there's all kinds of different abilities and and things that these cards might offer you, and it might set you up for doing a certain strategy during the game, which is kind of nice. Back out here. And I think the expansion does a 5th player, but I'm not really, it's not something I'm going to be probably ever doing, but so that's basically an overview of the game. So, my opinion of the game. Well, I've always liked the game. I liked the game when it first came out and enjoyed playing it quite a bit. But one of the things I do like about it is this wheel. And one of the interesting things about the game is sometimes, normally in a game when you can't do many actions and you can only do one thing, when when players can do multiple things in a turn, usually that's a negative. But the interesting thing about this game is doing nothing, as long as you've got your pegs out here on the board, is actually doing a lot, because if you can keep those out there for a while, they're actually doing the work for you. And when you do pull them off, you're going to get much better action. So I don't think I have another game that kind of quite works like that, where work is being done when you're not actually doing much of an action. So it's really about the timing and when to pull off these markers on the board and take the action, and when to place them, and in such a way that, since you always have to be pulling or placing, you really have to time what you're going to do well. So, and especially when there's certain things you want to do, like you may want to build a building, but you may want to have certain resources in place, so you have to have these other pegs in a position that you're going to be able to pull them off, get the resources, build a building, and do all of that at the same time, which is really interesting. That's probably the most interesting thing that I found in the game when I first started playing it. And there was enough of a variety with what you can do. You can go for these buildings, a lot of these buildings. You might go for a lot of these skulls or the temple. You might build up a lot of technologies, which will help you build buildings faster. You can avoid the resources and just go for corn and go for this space, which allows you to build buildings using corn instead. So when you first get the game, there is a lot to different strategies to try out. But like a lot of games that don't really have much variety in the board setup, and there isn't much variety other than what tiles here come out. Some of these scoring tiles might determine what strategy you might go for. But then again, you don't know if you're going to be able to get the tile that you want later on in the game. But what happens after a while with the base game is it becomes more mechanical in that there is no really variety in the setup. It's all out there on the board, and you know what you need to do, and people have started developing these strategies where almost like these formulas for what you do at the beginning of a game, like in a chess opening, and like the first some actions that you need to do, and it becomes a little more scripted in that sense, that there seems to be some strategies that have become sort of dominant. Excuse me. Like I said, I was going to start hacking up. Some dominant strategies in the game that have developed over time. So much so that for some people, the game might have even reached a point where they might have felt it was broken because of these dominant strategies. And I think most people who sit down and play the game, would not be an issue, but people who played 50 or 60 times online, the leading players have certain strategies, and those become the dominating strategies, and everybody tries to copy them and emulate them, and many of them sort of, they become dominating strategies for a reason. People are winning with them all the time. So now then the expansion comes in, and at first when I heard about the expansion, I was very skeptical about it, because I didn't know how I was going to feel about these character abilities and changing sort of the rules with how they play. Because one of the interesting things about the game that I found at first was that you can kind of calculate what your opponent is going for, and then you can decide how you might block them by getting to that space first, for example. Because since a lot of the game is based on timing, you can really throw somebody off if you can get into a space that you know that they want before they can do it. And I thought that these abilities would really mess up that, the way that you could actually plan to know what they can do, because some of these allow you to do different things and get to different spaces in different ways that you really can't stop the person, even if you if you could have in the base game, in the expansion, depending what card they have, you might not be able to anymore. So I thought that this might change the game too much. That was my initial fear with it, and I didn't know how I felt about these things at first, because I've seen expansions that try to do a little bit too much or change the game too much, and a lot of times some of those expansions just don't work out well. So I came in pretty skeptical about the expansion. But at the same time, what was happening with the game was that because there was little variation in the setup, there were these mechanical strategies that were being developed that seemed to work every time, because, if you see a certain building monument out, you can win this game if you're first player and you can do this strategy, and so forth. So that was really starting to take the game down. So it really needed something like this expansion to maybe break apart those dominating strategies. And I think that this has gone a long ways in doing that. And I have to say, I do like the expansion a lot now. And because of the variety and because of the way it sort of changes up how you play, I really do like this, because there's a lot of points that can be had on this board, and you can't necessarily totally ignore it, I don't think. But it gives you another way to get points, and it provides you a little bit of a path that you might be able to go on to break it up. And also these powers can give you a direction as far as a way you might want to go to win. So I like that as well. So I think it breaks the game up a little bit, and perhaps helps out with some of those problems with these dominating strategies, because of you just don't know what you're going to get in a draw here. Not to say that those strategies won't work anymore, but they're more dependent probably on what you draw and what tiles come out. You're going to have to adjust to that. So I think that's a positive. And I don't know if this has been played enough to really know, if it does in fact break up some of these strategies that have become very dominant online. So overall, I think it's I've always enjoyed the game. And like I said, it was getting a little dry, because it seemed to me that there was only so many ways, things that you could focus on to win. Yeah, there's some variety, different things, but you're going to take either a strategy where you're going to use corn, you're going to go for a lot of resources, you're going to go for the temple, and mix in maybe some crystal skulls and such. And it was, I'd probably seen about as much as I cared to see about of those strategies in the game. It wasn't much more to really explore with it, but this is giving a lot more life to it, especially this board here. I like this board a lot, the way you can't really ignore that necessarily. So I think this expansion is, I'll give it a thumbs up.